And I love it because it actually plays right into the point I was going to make about the Panthers. The Panthers have agreed to terms, according to Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network, with veteran defensive tackle A'Shawn Robinson, 3 years, $22.5 million, according to Garafolo's sources. This is a player with a history with Evero, the defensive coordinator, from their times with the Rams. Played most recently with the Giants last year. Here's the message that the Brian Burns trade, which they only got back a second and a fifth, the Dante Jackson cut, the Bradley Bozeman cut, the Hayden Hurst cut, the Von Bell cut, this signing, the Frankie Louvu decision not to match what money he got from the Commanders. Here's what all of that is saying. Last year, the Carolina Panthers were the worst team in the NFL, and Dave Canales and Dan Morgan don't want anyone who had any part of that hanging around. And I mean, maybe Bryce Young, because they said it wasn't his fault. That's about it. Everybody else, it feels like if they could move on from, they would move on from. The message from ownership, the message from the front office, the message from the coaching staff to the Panthers is an obvious one. Nothing about last year is acceptable, and they will take steps back to rid themselves of everything that led to last year. Right? And that is where something along the lines of moving Brian Burns for whatever you can get from him. For him, I should say. Moving Brian Burns for whatever you could get for him becomes a thing. Right? Cutting Von Bell and still having $9 million in dead cap and only getting $1 million in cap space back. Cutting Hayden Hurst and getting $50,000 in cap space back, which I know it's brutal when you have to talk about professional sports and things like $50,000 are literally nothing because we're regular people and $50,000 would be a lot of money. But $50,000 to the salary cap, literally nothing. They cut Hayden Hurst to get that back against the cap. The Panthers, you ready for this?
Go on.
They're going to be bad next year.
Oh, yeah. That's obvious.
A'Shawn Robinson, solid player.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is not I don't want to make it sound like, hey, I just heard this news that A'Shawn Robinson was sound, and now I can finally definitively say the Panthers are going to be bad next year. But that's not a player that's going to change that opinion. I think he's someone that can come in. He can be an extension of Evero. He's a good player on the interior defensive line. He'll benefit from Derek Brown taking so much attention. It's a good signing. The Panthers are going to be bad this upcoming year.
It's interesting how all their signings so far have all been interior guys. Offensive and defensive line, all interior.
Very good point. They're building from the inside out.
Yeah.
Traditionally, that's a good way to build. However, as of late, it does feel like the money gets spent on the edges. Corners, edge rushers, tackles, receivers, pass-catching tight ends, quarterbacks, all on the outside. But they can build in the trenches. If they want to go full old school, if they want to keep pounding, if they want to build like we've seen Panthers teams be very good in the past, okay.
We saw the Chiefs after they lost in the Super Bowl to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a few years ago. They're like, oh, our offensive line's not very good. Where do they start spending money? Offensive line. Interior offensive line to help Patrick Mahomes. It does matter. It's not sexy, but it matters.
It absolutely does. However, I will push back a little bit. You don't have to spend on wide receivers as much when you have Patrick Mahomes.
There's also that.
I get frustrated when people are, hey, just do what the Chiefs are doing. And I'm going like, all right, step one, find Patrick Mahomes. Then we'll get to step two.
Hey, that was Matt Rule's plan.
And by the way,
that was Matt Rule's plan.
By the way, nobody else has gotten past step one aside from the Chiefs. So, and many have tried. It's not that easy.
At the end of the day.
Here's the other thing about Dave Canales and Dan Morgan and the way they've gone about their free agency this year, right? Moving on from so many main contributors. I'm not as high on the Panthers 2023 defense as some are, but I am acknowledging that it's always going to be tough if you move on from like your three best players on a defense, right? Brian Burns, Frankie Louvu, at times Von Bell, like that's a core right there. They all played a lot of football for you.
Dante Jackson, as many times he got cooked, was their best corner because J.C. Horn was hurt.
Availability
for so long.
matters. There's a lot of here's how I'm going to put this, okay? Burning it down is the easy part. The Panthers are very aggressively starting at square one, right? And the only piece they're building around is Bryce Young. And this was largely, I assume, part of the sell to get the jobs they got, right? David Tepper, I'm sure, in those interviews for the new GM Dan Morgan and the new head coach Dave Canales, asked him, how do you see us coming out of this hole? We were the worst team in the NFL last year. What do we need to do? What's step one? Take me through it. How do we do this? And it's very obvious the first decision, the first plan was, well, you got to break it down to build it back up. The breaking it down is the easy part. Building it up is the hard part, especially when you break it down in this nature. Passing on the few sure things that you have is bold. Would it have cost a lot of money to keep Brian Burns? Yes, but guess what you would have had? Brian Burns. You would have had an edge rusher at a position of premium that you know the league respects. Would it have cost more than maybe you would have liked to have spent to keep Frankie Louvu? Yes. But guess what? You would have had an off-ball linebacker that you know can get after the quarterback and you know can simply make tackles. Moving on from those guys, that's the easy part. Finding a way to be better, that's much more difficult. And you only get one shot at this, right? You only have the job security to do this one time. If you do this 2 years from now, you lose your job. Because if you move on from a bunch of your good players, you're going to lose games next year. And you're going to be picking at the top of the draft, and you're going to be picking in the top 5, and everybody's going to say, oh, you know what, that is an attractive head coaching position because they can get their quarterback, and they're going to want to go there. You only get one shot at the burn-down rebuild. And the Panthers are, Dave Canales and Dan Morgan are going for it. And it is kind of that Brandon Beane style philosophy, right? Brandon Beane was asked what he thought of the Brandon Beane, the GM for the Buffalo Bills, was remembering like how he treated the trade up to get Josh Allen, and he goes, it was kind of freeing because if it didn't work, I wouldn't be here anyway, and if it did work, it wouldn't matter how much I gave up for him because then it would have worked, and I'd have my franchise quarterback, and everyone would go good trade.
Yeah,
that's kind of what it is for Dan Morgan and Dave Canales, right? What did you think when you decided to trade Brian Burns? What did you think when you decided not to bring back 3, 4, 5 of your main contributors from a defense that was the bright spot last year? What did you think when you decided to spend $150 million on guards? Part of it might be, it's kind of freeing because if it doesn't work, I'm not going to be here in 3 years to have to clean it up. And if it does work, all the little individual, did we not get an extra third for Brian Burns? It won't matter because it'll have worked in our plan. We would have replaced him with someone better. We would have built ourselves into a contender. And by that point, we'll be the toast of the town. They'll be going to more Duke Carolina games. Dave Canales was at the Duke Carolina game.
Yeah, I don't blame him for going to that. I told Paul I handled this this morning on Next Up, and
check it out every morning, 9 to 10, right here, 99.9 The Fan.
And I told it also to Chris Lee on Panthers Playbook. We couldn't
check it out everywhere podcasts can be found, as well as our YouTube page, Panthers YouTube. Playbook.
I said this team is not going to be winning games, or it's not going to be in a position to actually really win games until 2026, in my opinion. Because the rebuild's going to take more than just 1 year. Because like you said, there's the teardown, got to find pieces this year, and you still need to find pieces in 2025. Now, do you want to see progress in building? Yes, absolutely. But 2026, in my opinion, if you're not 10-win team at that point in 2026, this is all failure.
Here's the way I think you measure success next year. Do you have a winning caliber offense?
Mm-hmm.
I think when you're letting so many defensive players go and or trading them and or not re-signing them, whatever it is, and you're spending so much of your resources on offense and you have a former #1 overall pick at quarterback, your offense should start making some pretty big strides. If your defense takes a step back, well, what did you expect? You moved on from the second highest paid edge rusher in the league. You moved on from a solid off-the-ball linebacker and a solid safety and a solid corner. If you move on from those guys, you're going to take a step back. As long as there's 2 steps forward on offense, we'll call it progress and move on.
That's all you want is progress.